Alright, hi guys, this is another video, and just like the title says, this is going to be a tutorial of how to reprogram the JDS Labs C5 portable headphone amplifier. And if you remember my previous video with the review of the C5, I mentioned that you can reprogram the C5's potentiometer. And so the way you set it up is that you need to get this pocket AVR programmer. And this is so that you can communicate the C5 with the computer with the Arduino code, which I will talk about in just a second. And basically you just buy that and you plug it into your computer with a mini USB port, and then there's a ribbon cable. Actually, I'll show you guys right here. So this is the mini USB port, goes directly to the AVR programmer, and then it comes with this ribbon cable. And then this ribbon cable connects to the C5. And just like my last video, I mentioned that I soldered in these header pins right here, and you have to purchase those separately and solder them in yourself. And so if you've never soldered before, it's pretty simple. You just need this 2x3 set of header pins, put it in, solder it. And you actually need to clip the tops of these because they're a little bit too tall to fit inside the C5's case. So I just used a regular nail clipper to trim that. And so you just connect the pocket AVR programmer's female pins into the male pins on the C5's board, just like that. And make sure that the cable is facing outward from the C5 because this red cable here indicates a specific pin on the board, and there's a little 1 labeled there. So just make sure that you have that plugged in so that the cable is facing outward from the C5, and you should be set to go for setting that up. Back to the computer, you also need the C5's code. So if you Google JDS Labs Blog C5, you'll get to this article. And then if you scroll all the way to the bottom, there should be a download link for getting the C5's code, and it should be labeled under open source firmware right here. And so once you download that, you just click on that and you can download a zip file. And within that zip file, there's a readme file and a boards.txt file. And you need to make sure that the boards.txt file is placed in the correct folder according to the readme file. So make sure you do that first. Then you can go ahead and Google Arduino and click on the first link, and you'll get to this page. And you should download Arduino. Unfortunately, I haven't gotten this reprogramming process to work under Windows 7, both in 32-bit and 64-bit. So unfortunately, this is for macOS only. So for this tutorial, you would download the macOS version of Arduino. And speaking of Arduino, if you've never programmed in Arduino before, it uses a similar language to C, and so if you actually go up to this reference page right here, it'll give you a list of the different coding structures that you can use within Arduino. And in this case, we will be using the switch case, which basically keeps track of a variable, and then based on what variable it's on, it will execute a line of code corresponding to that specific switch. And so that is basically how this tutorial will work out. And then lastly, you will need this CrossPack for AVR Development. Again, this is for Mac OS X only, and this will allow you to communicate your C5 with the SparkFun Electronics AVR programmer with your computer. And so once you get all of those set up, go ahead and open the C5's code in Arduino. Let me make sure that this font size is readable. Let's change this to 15. There, I think that should be readable. Let's get that to autofocus. Alright, so this is the C5's code. I did modify it, so I will kind of walk you through the steps of kind of the overview of what this code does. And so right at the top here we have the pinouts, and that basically tells the code to hardwire the specific functions of the C5's actual hardware. And then you'll have these temporary variables right here, and that just kind of stores the initial values for when the C5 first turns on. And then those values will be stored in this setup phase. And so when you turn on your C5, those initial variables will be set up according to the pins. In my case, I commented this part out because this part actually tells the C5 to load the last values that it stored from the last playback session. And so I actually just reset it to the standard values, which are low gain and lowest volume. And so that's just for a safety precaution to prevent super loud volume from playing right when I turn on the C5. That's optional, but it's just something I wanted to put in for safety's sake. And then right here is the main loop. So the main loop will basically keep track of 3 different actions. So when you turn the volume button up or down, or you push the center button to switch the gain. And so basically when this first block of code here, it says if the center button or the gain button is pushed, change the mode. And this mode will either increase from 0 to 1, from 1 to 2, and then once it's greater than 2, it goes back to 0. And so you'll have 3 modes of operation: mode 0, mode 1, mode 2. Alright, going back to the switch case, as I mentioned earlier, so the switch case, again, it changes the code based on what mode it's on. So for case 0, or mode 0, we basically have the standard code that the C5 has hardwired in when you first get it. And so you basically have a delay of 55 between each volume increment. So 55 means 55 milliseconds. So when you hold the volume button, it changes the volume every 55 milliseconds. And so that's pretty standard. I also have it set so that the gain state is 0, or low gain, just to confirm. So when it goes from state 2 to state 0, it actually switches the gain from high gain to low gain. And then you need the break right here, and so that allows the code to know when that specific case's code is done. So make sure you have the break case there. And then for case 1 right here, as I said in this comment, we have low gain mode and a slower volume increase. And so instead of the delay being 55 milliseconds, I doubled that to 110 milliseconds. And so that basically just takes twice as long for the volume to change. And the gain is still at low gain, so I didn't include any gain code in here. And lastly, for case 1 and case 2, I included this flashing LED set of code. It's similar to the previous original JDS Labs flashing LED for low battery light, but this is for just for this particular mode and not really pertaining to the battery LED. You can hardwire different LEDs, and there's actually a spot on the board for it. Right here, where it says LED 3, those 2 silver points right there, sorry my finger is so fat, but those 2 silver points right above my fingernail, those are spots for a surface mount LED, which you need a small soldering iron to use to put that LED on there. Unfortunately, I don't have a small enough soldering iron, so I'm just going to program the code so that it flashes the regular battery LED. And so basically, every 125 milliseconds, the LED will flash. And so that will tell me visually that I'm on mode 1. And again, you need that break statement for breaking the code for mode 1. And lastly, in case 2, I change the gain to high gain, and then I have an even slower volume increase. And so right here, I change the state to 1, which is high gain, and then I call the change gain code. And then the change of volume, I set the delay to 220 milliseconds, which is twice as slow as from mode 1. And so when you have high gain mode, I just wanted to have a slower increase in volume so that I don't get a rapid change in volume for high gain, which is already a louder volume. And so that just allows a smoother volume control. And then, just like in mode 1, I have this code right here to call the flashing LED, and this time instead of 125 seconds, it flashes twice as fast at 62.5 milliseconds. And so, again, I have a visual indication of when I'm in mode 2. And just like before, make sure you have the break. And lastly, in this main loop, it has the check battery code, which is original and still part of JDS Labs' original code. This part that I commented out here, that's, again, like I mentioned before, it's storing the last session's values in the C5's flash memory. And I commented that out because I want to start the C5 fresh from volume 1 and low gain every time. Right here we have the change volume set of code, so when the main loop calls for the change volume, it does this. I don't completely understand how it works, but so I left that as normal. I didn't do anything to that code. Similarly, for the change gain, it basically recognizes the gain state, either 0 for low gain or 1 for high gain, and then it changes the gain based on that when it's called. And this change LED and fast LED lines of code are just changing the LED of when it turns on or off. It's just basically a bunch of if statements, and they're pretty close to each other, so I didn't really make that completely by my own. I used the original JDS Labs change LED as a kind of template. And lastly, we have the check battery, which basically just checks the battery every half a second to make sure that the battery is running good. And so once you get all of this coded up, go ahead and go to Tools, Board, and you want to select the JDS Labs C5 board. Also, you want to go to Tools, Programmer, and select the USB Tiny ISP. And that will communicate with the SparkFun Electronics AVR board, which connects to your C5. And then once you're done with all of that, go ahead and upload your code. And there's a little loading thing down here, the bottom right corner, to tell you when it's done. And once that's done, go ahead and use your C5. And I'll do a quick test for you guys. So I will unplug the C5 from the SparkFun Electronics board. I will connect the C5 directly to my MacBook with a F.Y.I L2 connector. And I'm plugging that into the headphone port. And then I have a cheapo pair of Sennheiser earbuds that I use for testing purposes. So let's go ahead and give this a test. Let's pick a song track. How about Third Eye Blind, Semi-Charmed Life? Good song. Alright. Let's try out this test. So, turning on the C5. Alright, so this is mode 1, solid LED. Let's go ahead and play some music. Alright, so it's very low volume, and let me adjust the volume. Keep note of how fast it changes. So that changes pretty fast. So let's switch to mode 1. So this is the flashing LED, same low gain, but a slower rate of change in volume. So flashing LED, cool. Let's increase the volume. So it changes the volume slower. And lastly, high gain mode with an even faster LED. So let's turn this down. So volume and then high gain. There we go. Super flashing LED and a slower rate of volume change. And that's pretty much how you reprogram the C5. JDS Labs actually sent me some black end plates. And so if you wanted to check that out, this is what it looks like. You can go ahead and order that for free with your C5. Just make sure you place a comment. Other than that, that's all I have for today. This is the first piece of audiophile equipment that I've ever seen that you can reprogram this. So this is pretty awesome. If you have any questions, leave a comment below. Thank you for watching.